Jared Flint once said, "Competition is a painful thing, but it produces great results." My statement is the end justifies the means, and Jared Flint's quote represents this statement because it says that what happens along the way can be painful, but great results come from painful things. I agree with this quote and my statement because even if the process is ugly, the result justifies the process. My first main point is how will you know what the end result is worth without seeing the now destructive path that you took to get there. This means that you can't try to say that the end result wasn't worth the lives lost because the lives lost give you motivation to keep going and to keep fighting. My first example of this is World War I. In World War I, France lost more than 1 million lives, but that gave them motivation, and the French ended up on the winning side of the war. Once the war was over, France looked back on the hard-beaten path that they took and realized that this war was about more than getting more land and defeating the Germans as opposed to the lives that were lost. It was about how the French felt like they should just give up after so many of them were killed. But they fought back and showed the world that it doesn't matter how many of you die, it matters if your goal is achieved. My other example of this is the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. One thing that was important in the book was Napoleon the pig's power. The way that Napoleon gained power was by killing other animals and by training dogs to chase other animals. It was okay that Napoleon killed some animals because he was the leader of the farm and he needed to make sure that he was being respected. Killing other animals gave him more power. My other main point is that equality is greater than any troubles in the world, such as death, failing economies, and poverty. Equality is justified by any violence and any other means used to achieve equality. My first example of this is the book Wonder by R.J. Colisio. The main character is a lot different from most kids because of his facial condition. Even though it was very hard for August to feel welcome at school, it eventually happened. It didn't matter how much he got teased and how many days he would sit with only 1 or 2 people at lunch, because by the end of the year he had friends and he was seen as normal for the first time in his life. My second example of equality is the French Revolution. The French Revolution was started because it had economic troubles and inequality, and they were influenced by the American Revolution. One of the major parts of the French Revolution was the Reign of Terror, which was when there were mass executions of enemies of the revolution by political leaders. At the height of the Reign of Terror, there were 50 people being executed a day. Although many people died in the Reign of Terror, the French looked past this and eventually got the result that they deeply wanted. One thing that my opponent might argue is about the Industrial Revolution. Yes, there were awful work conditions, but lots of advances were made and created, such as mass production of steel. Also, kids were given awful work conditions, but it was better for kids to be working and earning money for their family instead of sitting at home doing nothing. The end justifies the means is more than just a nice thing. It means that whatever happened along the way was motivation to get the end result that was wanted. Thank you. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
So, Sydney, you have 2 minutes to cross-examine Claire, and then time to
Murder is illegal, correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that murder is also immoral?
Yes.
What if it is necessary to murder somebody to get to an end that you want? Would that make it any less illegal or immoral?
No.
So, does the end, the fact that you got what you wanted, does that justify the murder?
Yes.
But you said earlier that murder is still immoral if you use it to get to an end that you want.
Yeah.
So, do the ends justify the means in this case?
Yeah.
Moving on, do you believe that cheating on a test or in a game is wrong?
Yes.
So does it make cheating right if you get a good score on your test or if you win the game?
It depends.
In what situations would you say that cheating on a test would not be wrong to get to an end?
Maybe you know the material, it's just you're not good at taking tests.
For the next question, do you believe that multiple ends can be affected by the same means?
Yes.
So there were many deaths in the Industrial Revolution due to unsafe machines and working conditions, correct?
Correct.
But because of the factories, many products were made cheaply, correct?
Correct.
time.
statement is that the ends do not justify the means. If we believe that the ends justify the means, it can lead to negative consequences in the future. Anything can be justified as long as we believe that there is an end somewhere in the future. As the French author Georges Bernanos said, the first sign of corruption in a society that is still alive is that the end justifies the means. When we do the easy thing to get to an end instead of the right thing, it can have adverse future consequences and can negatively affect future ends. One example of this is in the Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, most working-class children were working long hours in factories instead of receiving an education. These children were just used as a means to get cheap products from the factories. Because of this, in the future, the only jobs that those children could take were factory jobs. If they had educated children, instead of putting them to work in the coal mines and factories, there would be more innovations in the future, and the technology of the day would progress faster. Because the next generation had no education, there were less innovators later. There were long-term effects on society, even though at the time they could make items cheaply. Another example is how the conquistadors in the Americas melted down the native people's gold to make money. The means they used affected future ends. Even though they made lots of money from it at the time, now the native people's culture is destroyed. There is never just one end affected by the means one uses. If we believe that the end justifies the means, we can justify anything, as long as we think that there's going to be an end to justify those means. When we believe that the end justifies the means, we feel entitled to be able to do horrific and immoral things, including exploitation or even murder, in the name of this end. One example of this is when the Spanish conquered Mexico. They killed the Aztec people in war in the name of converting the native people to Christianity and stealing their resources, such as silver and gold. The Atlantic slave trade is another example of this point. When the settlers of the Americas took the people from Africa, they justified their acts by believing that this would lead to a good end for them, using the slave for involuntary labor to gain money from their cash crops. 12 to 20 million people were taken from Africa. The belief that the ends justify the means can be used as an excuse to do anything. My opponent said that the means can also justify the ends. However, if you use different means to get to an end, you will not need the means to justify the end. When you believe that the ends justify the means, there will be many negative future consequences. The belief that the end justifies the means can be used as an excuse to justify hurting innocent people. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
So you have, excuse me, you have 2 minutes to cross-examine Sydney, and that time begins.
August from the book Wonder was treated poorly at school, correct?
Yes.
Do you think that it must have been hard for him to be treated this poorly?
Yes.
Do you agree that it was a big deal when he was finally treated like a lot of the other kids at school?
Yes, it was very important to be treated like all the other kids.
So do you think that the being teased and being treated poorly was important, but knowing that for the first time in your life you were treated like other people, don't you think that was important?
Well, I believe that in this case, the means for him to get treated like all the other kids, he was brave and courageous, and the teasing was not a means to get to an end, the means that he used to get accepted by all the other kids were acting with kindness.
Well, do you think that after he was treated like everyone else, he finally had friends? Don't you think that when he went out into the real world, that made him stronger and more confident?
Yes.
So don't you think that because having that ending of the book really helped him so much that it, as you said, like the journey helps different means, don't you think that it helped him later on in his life?
Well, the means he used were, he used moral means, and the teasing that he received was not a means to get to the end of the book.
Okay, moving on. What do you think of...
You each have 1 minute to prepare your closing statement, and you're going to leave the table behind you when that 1 minute begins. So Claire will begin with your opening statement, and you'll have a minute, and Sydney will close with yours. Claire, you have 1 minute, and that begins.
If all we worried about was what bad things happened along the way, then we wouldn't have appreciated the result and everything that was accomplished, and all the hard work put in would go to waste. Sometimes you have to sacrifice to accomplish anything that is worth fighting for. My opponent argued that sometimes the journey is so awful that it can't be worth the result. But as I said in my opening statement, sometimes what happens along the way can be painful, but great results come from painful things. I think that I definitely agree with this because no matter what happens along the way, the result always justifies the process. As Edward Abbey once said, if the end does not justify the means, then what can? I would like for you to think about this. If the end doesn't justify the means, then really what can? Thank you.
And Sydney, you have 1 minute, and that time begins.
The ends do not justify the means. Even though different means can still reach the same end, there are many ends in the future that can be impacted by the same means. There will never just be one end that those means can reach. When you believe that the ends justify the means, you can justify killing innocent people or doing awful things in the name of the end that you think you will reach. The belief that the ends justify the means can be used as an excuse to do whatever you want. There are many examples of this in history, including the Industrial Revolution and the Atlantic slave trade. My opponent argued that in wonder August went through teasing to become accepted by the other kids in his school. However, the teasing was not the means to get to the end. He was kind to the rest of the kids, and that's why he was accepted. The end cannot justify the means. Thank you.